Welcome, friends, to this Ventures course of Spirituality on the Screen with Walt Wiltschek. As just by way of introduction, most of you know Walt, but Walt currently lives in Lombard, Illinois, and started last year as a part-time district executive minister for the Illinois-Wisconsin district. But many of you also know him from his chaplaincy work. He's currently at Illinois Wesleyan University, but he was previously pastor of the Easton, Maryland Church of the Brethren and a campus pastor at Manchester University, and has been the editor of Messenger magazine, for which he still does some writing and editing. And he says that he enjoys traveling, camp ministry, puns, and wordplay, as well as cheering for a various sports team. And Walt, I'll let you share more as you get started, but without further ado, I'm willing just to turn it over to you and let you take it away.
All right. Well, thanks, Enton, and good to be with you all tonight. Thank you for making time here from various places. I know for some of you it's still afternoon, others of you maybe at dinner time or into the evening, but glad that you can share a couple hours as we explore this together. Let me just get a little feel of where folks are from. I know many of you, like Enton said, but if you can just kind of stick your hand up if you're able to. I know a few of you don't have cameras there, but anyone from Pennsylvania and Maryland in that area, go ahead, stick your hand up. Okay. How about anyone from Virginia or West Virginia? Too many there. Any Ohio and Indiana folks with us tonight? Yeah, a bunch there. I see a couple Illinois folks in. Anybody in the Mountain Time Zone? All right, have a number there out in the plains and mountains, and any Pacific Coast, West Coast folks. All right, a few of you as well. And anyone joining us tonight from Hawaii or Alaska? I'd be quite jealous. And anybody from another country or planet joining us tonight? All right, well, a couple of you are claiming that. All right.
Walt, you missed the most important part. Iowa, Missouri, Kansas, Nebraska.
That's true. I went Central Time Zone to go far enough there. Okay, how about anyone
flew right over us.
And it's even hosted by McPherson in Kansas there. So how about anybody there in the Plains districts or Missouri, Arkansas? All right. Sorry about that. Good to have so many of you with us as well. And while we're at it, let me ask one other poll question here while your hands are warmed up now. How many of you would consider yourselves fairly voracious consumers of TV, movies, things like that, that you'd say it's something that you watch a lot? Okay, how many of you kind of moderately? It's something you do sometimes, but not necessarily a whole lot. Okay, that seems to get a lot of you. And how many little or none of your time is spent in that pursuit? Okay, one or two, maybe preferring books or nature, that sort of thing. Well, I'm glad to have all of you from those different experiences and backgrounds. My own interest in this goes a long way back. Part of it probably shows up in the way that my career path went, that I started out as a journalist, not what I was expecting, but started as a part-time job during college, got a job with the sports department at our local newspaper, and that turned into a full-time job after college and through seminary, and of course, eventually into church journalism, working for Messenger and some of the other organs of the church. At the same time, I was doing seminary and learning more about all these theological threads and starting to do some more church work, and have served in some congregations and, as Enton said, in some chaplaincy settings in higher education. And so I became kind of fascinated with the way that these two fields intersected with each other. I've done some workshops on this topic, especially for youth events. And while I was at Manchester, I taught a first-year seminar course that was called The Language of Faith. It had some broader overview of looking at the aspects of different religious traditions, but a piece of looking at how faith is portrayed in media. My paper for my master's in journalism degree looked at how newspapers cover faith or don't. And so it's something that's been on my mind and a passion of mine for a long time. And so that's kind of what brought this to mind when Ventures asked about a topic that I might share on. So I hope you enjoy it as much as I have as we walk through some of it tonight. This will be an introduction to that field. There's a lot more out there if it's something that tickles your fancy too. So with that, let's dig in a little bit. And I'm going to try to share my PowerPoint here with you. And hopefully this will come up so you all can see that well. All right, so I want to start with a disclaimer. No less than Pope Gregory the Great, who was, of course, in office many centuries ago, once said that almost everything said of God is unworthy for the very reason that it is capable of being said. The idea that when we try to condense God to particular words, or I'd extend that to images as well, that nothing can really capture the immensity and awesomeness of who and what God is. But of course, that has not kept us from trying over the years. And perhaps the corollary to that, to make us feel better about trying to boldly go into this territory anyhow, would come from former Archbishop of Canterbury, Rowan Williams, who said, "The words we use are not an attempt to label the divine reality. They are words we use to keep ourselves moving and to keep ourselves longing." And I think that's what drives us to continue to capture some sense of the divine with the tools that we have at hand. In earlier centuries, of course, before moving pictures were possible, that often happened in other aspects of art, particularly in the Renaissance, but continuing on after that, I have just 3 examples here among the most famous that you probably recognize from Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo. The Last Supper, of course, which you can find in Milan, and then the Pietà and the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel in Rome. And so for centuries, humans have tried somehow, some way in pictures to get some sense of what this faith is that we are about. And in a lot of ways, it's a uniquely Christian endeavor, at least in the Western world. In the Eastern religions, there's more visual representations too. But of course, in Judaism, and especially in Islam, trying to put this into visual form is not something that's regularly done. In Islam especially, you don't try to picture Muhammad or Allah. That's considered completely out of bounds. In Judaism too, while there is some illustrations over the years, for the most part, if you go into a synagogue or into a mosque, you're not going to find portraits or even the stained glass imagery that we find in our churches the way you would in a Christian church. But for Christians, that sort of visual representation has been consistently important. And of course, as communications means and technology has changed over the years, the way that we have tried to shape and share that message has changed along with it. And often religion has been at the forefront of these various methods. Oral tradition, for example, we would not have the Bible as we have it today without the oral tradition of storytelling and passing that on from generation to generation, as happened through the Hebrew scriptures. Eventually, there were pictographs and writings of various times as these stories were put down onto parchment or sheepskins or other things, eventually onto paper and scrolls. Gutenberg, of course, brought us the printing press, and what was one of the first things to come off the printing press? The Gutenberg Bible. And on through the centuries, into radio and TV and movies, and now into internet, social media, all of the streaming platforms. There are so many streaming platforms at this point offering different possibilities that I think about lost track of them. I try to go on a couple of favorites to keep up with new things that are coming out. And I heard on the radio the other day that I think I have this number right, that there were now approximately 850 million possible video files to watch at different places and different platforms on the internet. And I kind of like the quote here from the Atlanta Journal I have at the bottom, just pondering if Jesus had lived now instead of 2,000 years ago and had access to the internet, would he have needed 12 disciples, or could he have just used one guy with good typing skills and a high-speed data line, his Enton Eller of the day? How would that message have looked different had Jesus lived in another time of humanity? And in case you still doubt that media is indeed a huge part of our lives, although I doubt many need convincing of that at this point, according to a study by Statista just this past fall, consumers around the world, and note that's around the world, consume an average of about 7.5 hours per day with media of some form. But then note the caveat after that, that that's generally a higher amount with American consumers. And if you look down there at the next couple, you'll see in 2007, a US Census Bureau study found that Americans spend more than 3,500 hours per year consuming media. And if you do some quick math, thinking there's 365 days in a year, that tells you that that's almost 10 hours, 9.5 roughly, for a typical American. And that was in 2007. When the pandemic hit, boom, that surged upward. And according to an eMarketer study, almost 5,000 hours a year for the average American. It might embody what T.S. Eliot said in one of his writings, that we're distracted from distraction by distraction. Media is a way that we get away perhaps from all of the other things, or when we're locked down, it's the one thing that we can still engage with. So it's small wonder that religion has found its way so prominently into our media outlets. Now, I have a quiz for you, and when I put it up here, I want you to feel free, if you figure it out, to unmute yourself and make a guess at the answer. Ready? You will not be graded on this, don't worry. It doesn't mean you're going to fail the course. And if you need to move your windows a little to see everybody, the question is, what do all of these 8 people have in common? And the answer is not they're actors. We're going to give you that as a gimme. But beyond that, what do these people have in common? Anyone have a guess? And Enton, help me look if there's any hands there as well. Okay, Frank?
Did they all play God?
All right. Bonus points for Frank Ramirez. They did indeed.
Steve Buscemi was in the Miracle Workers. So yeah.
Yeah, he's the most recent one. If you haven't seen on TBS, it's a quirky show, probably not for everybody. Goes into some territory that some might even consider a little blasphemous, but does some interesting things in exploring the workings of God and heaven and all that. Avril Lavigne was in Dogma. Morgan Freeman in a film we'll be looking at a little bit later, Bruce Almighty and its sequel. Richard Pryor was in, not all of these are great movies, by the way, but they did all play God in one. In God We Trust. Rodney Dangerfield was in a relatively recent one, I think it was around 2005, called Angels with Angles. It did not get good reviews. George Burns, of course, in the Oh God series. Octavia Spencer in The Shack, and Whoopi Goldberg, believe it or not, played God in a Muppets movie. And there was another one that she was in as well. So yeah, all of those people play God. And if you look at that display there, I think it's a rather interesting collection of characters. I found it fascinating that half of them are Black actors. You also have a balance there of women and men. So it hasn't necessarily always been kept to one stereotype either, but all of these people have played
Walt?
God. Yes.
Walt, you said that was Avril Lavigne?
Yes. I'm sorry. Yeah. Alanis Morissette. was the other, yeah. So all of them have played God at one time or another. And a quote here from one of our UU colleagues that I thought was interesting, saying that writers, singers, filmmakers, and producers are they myth makers for our time. That idea that people want to go in and get to the deeper heart of things, not just to consume blankly staring at a screen, but to hear stories and to get meaning. And they use the phrase myth makers there. And I think a lot of times when we hear myth, we think of something that's false or fictional. But myth really just refers to something that's traditional story, often one that goes beyond ourselves in some way, kind of a symbolic narrative that weaves together important threads of a story and often contains quite a bit of truth in it, woven with that wonderful shine of oral tradition and other factors as well. There was an author I heard some years ago named Marilyn Robinson who said, if you write something that means something to you, chances are good that it will mean something to others. And I think that's what a lot of the folks that are doing these shows, these movies, are trying to do. Take something that has somehow or other resonated with them, sometimes positively, sometimes negatively, sometimes ambiguously, and give expression to that so that others can interact with it as well. So with that, I want to talk a little bit more about my journey into all of this. A long, long time ago in a galaxy far, far away on a strange planet called Pennsylvania, when I was a kid, I went to my very first Star Wars movie in the theater. It was Return of the Jedi, which is of course the third installment, so I was kind of coming in part way, but I didn't know that at the time. And I came out of that theater with something that was kind of stirring inside of me that got excited by that and thrilled by that in a way that I hadn't experienced before. It might be what we in some ways call a religious experience. Now, not that I went in there at that time as a pre-adolescent and thought, ah, yes, that spaceship is a metaphor for our spiritual journey, and that 7-foot-tall furry thing is a prophet, sharing with us the word of God. It wasn't on that level, but more just of that idea of igniting a passion somewhere within me. I liked sciencey things. I liked movies. I still do. And having those come together in a way that I hadn't seen before lit a fire inside that, again, was just the start of something, a different sort of journey for me. And I think for a lot of people, that's happened with movies and shows at some point, that they pull us in. There's that power of storytelling, of good storytelling at least, that draws us. I found out later in, reading more about Star Wars, and as I watched it later, and of course I went back and watched the earlier ones, and now there have been a bunch of sequels of people wrestling with some of the religious and spiritual themes that they see in the movies. And so maybe on some level, some of that was connecting with me too. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of that later. And I've even read that George Lucas, of course, producer, director of the Star Wars films, had some Buddhist influence in his life that he says did work into some of the ideas he was having as he was putting this. And of course, Christians have seen Christian themes emerge from that too. So I want us to think about what is it that creates a religious experience? Is it the idea of inspiration, which would speak more to our pietist heritage as brethren, that thing that gets at our emotions and stirs us inside and makes us have that deeper connection to the divine? Is it the idea of having a common narrative and community, a shared journey together as what happens, in an audience and a good experience like that, which that might hearken a little bit more to our Anabaptist roots and that community aspect? Is it about a message that makes us think and take action? Is it the music, liturgy, other aspects? What is it that defines that? There was an article I found some years ago, and I've kept in my files, by a pastor named Douglas Sweet. And he talked about how movies probably stick with most of us more than sermons that we've heard. You'll hear people often quoting to you from movies favorite lines or talking about favorite characters. It's probably less likely that they come, months, years later and say, oh yeah, the sermon I heard at the church the other year, blah, 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 and everybody laughs because they remember the line or they shed a tear. And as this author reflects on that, he says, you've probably discovered that movies can challenge you in ways that sermon cannot, due to the visual images they place before us. The best movies will allow you to explore the gospel message in rich detail. And in group settings, the discussions that follow can provide a whole host of teachable moments. Movies can be more than a means for entertainment, especially if one takes the time to reflect on the messages contained within the films. And he says some of our most spiritual experiences probably have occurred within a movie theater. And so that got me thinking about some of the comparisons between that, and you can draw your own conclusions on that. But I was thinking, okay, in a church, you have the sanctuary, this large space with a lot of seats. Theater, fairly similar in that regard. A church, you have your preachers and worship planners. In movies, you have your actors and directors, the various characters. And some of you might say your pastors are characters too. So all kinds of connections possible there. Communion table up front is kind of the focus in church, perhaps a worship center. In movies, it's a screen. A sacred text for us in the church, the film and screenplay, and on through the others there. And I think it's fascinating too that if you think about it, a lot of our churches in recent years have become more and more like movie theaters. I suspect for many of you, the sanctuary now has a screen somewhere at the front of the church. Some churches have done away with pews and put in seating that looks a lot more like what you might have in a theater. Think about some of our most holy moments in the church year, like Good Friday or Love Feast, for example, or Christmas Eve. What do? We turn down the lights. So I find it's an interesting amount of synergy between the two. Eric, I see a hand up there. Go ahead.
Well, I was just thinking about this parallel you're finding, and I was just thinking that there are some congregations that actually meet in movie theaters for worship.
There are indeed, yeah, good point. There's some where they don't have their own building, either they've sold it or just looking for a place to start. And yeah, movie theaters have become a popular place for those. And of course, here, even in the Church of the Brethren, we have a congregation living stream that Enton works with that happens entirely online by video. And so there's always a debate between, the medium and the message, and they're not equivalent, but more and more we've seen the medium of theater enter in the way that we share the message in church. And some of the message of church appears in the media of the theater. And especially, of course, in this pandemic time, the joke going around is that just about every pastor now has become a televangelist because they've had to learn how to use these media to connect with people over a wide swath. One other quote I want to share with you here from that same article that I was mentioning with Sweet. And he said, Jesus was a storyteller. And some of the best storytellers today are Hollywood producers who create the visual images on the silver screen. Movies allow us to enter into worlds different from our own, and they enrich our lives with powerful, new, and challenging perspectives. And in a little bit, I'm going to give you a chance to talk about some of those experiences you've had. And they aren't necessarily, obviously, all ones that happen in a theater. Sports events can be like that. One of the more powerful, quote, religious experiences for me and kind of getting a sense of community and togetherness happened at a Minnesota Twins game some years ago, seeing the way people pulled together. For some people, it might be a concert or some other type of event. One of the really interesting things I found, this was a few years ago when I visited the museum, but I was just out in Seattle, as I mentioned to a couple of you ahead of this, just this past week. You'll find the Museum of Pop Culture at the corner of the park that includes the Space Needle and some of the other highlights of Seattle. And the highest point of this museum, which I believe is under that purpley section there, 85 feet tall, is a huge open space with one of the largest screens, LED screens in the entire world. And they call it Sky Church. And around that large screen, there's all kinds of other screens showing scenes and stories from around the world. I have not been able to find anything stating why they decided to name it that. But when I walked in and saw that name posted there in that space, it was one of those moments when I kind of thought, With that, I want to pause here quick because I know that was a lot of information and a lot of time and a lot of information in a short time. I want to see if there's any questions about that. And then I want to give a little time here to pop into a few breakout rooms to wrestle with a question or two around this. Are there any questions at this point? You can either raise your hand with the icon there or just unmute yourself and ask, or just kind of wave your phalanges and Enton will help spot you there. All right. I'm not seeing any, so Enton, if we're ready, why don't we go ahead and in just a moment here, break folks up into groups here. I'm going to give you, let's see, like probably 6 or 7 minutes, and just talk about any of those kind of religious experiences that you've had outside of church. I'm going to hope that many of you have had religious experiences inside church, because hopefully that's why we all come together. And if we're not having that, then we need to look at our faith again. But where have you had those kind of tingly moments that stir something inside of you in a particular way beyond the church? Where are those moments that you have found holy ground, perhaps? Where are the places where you have felt some connection to the divine in a way that you might not have elsewhere? Think especially about media, since that's our topic tonight, but if there aren't any of those that jump to mind for you and you have others that have served that for you, feel free to share that too. So Enton, if we're ready, let's divide folks up, and then you'll get a signal when we're called back here together, and we'll give you an opportunity to share.
Great, thanks, Walt. We're ready. I'm ready to put you into breakout rooms. And I'd suggest, if you look at your clocks, we'll plan to come back at 35 minutes after the hour, whichever hour you happen to be on. And I'll try to give you a 30-second warning and a couple-minute warning. So we'll put you into groups of 4 or 5. And again, to repeat the question, they're going to be talking about where are those times where they've felt something special, had that holy moment, media if possible, and if not, wherever else that has happened, right?
Exactly, yeah, those kind of religious experiences, we
Great.
might call them.
Okay, friends, here we go into our breakout rooms. And welcome back, Marlis. Others will be joining us soon.
Did she get a prize too for being the first one back?
Sure.
Remember, I was a teacher about almost 30 years, so.
Okay, friends, I think we're all back. And so, Walt, back to you.
Well, let me give you all an opportunity here. I'd be interested to hear, I know you didn't have a lot of time to discuss, but if anything came up in your sharing, or if there's something you didn't get to share in your small group, what have been some of those experiences for you? Again, especially if it happened in connection to media of some sort, but if there's something else that particularly stirred you and felt meaningful, we'd be glad to hear that too. Just feel free to unmute yourself and share with the group here. We have the PowerPoint down so we can all see each other, or most of each other.
Walt, this is Nancy Reynolds from Kansas. This year in Western Plains, we had our first virtual women's retreat, and it was just really very, very good.
Very good. Any others?
This is Don from Idaho, and I had started to talk in the group, and so just recently, actually, we had a showing of the film The Shack at the church, and we're very involved in prison ministry and transitional housing, and it was really amazing because it's a lot of these big tough guys, and we all gathered in the church, and they all came to watch, and they were watching the film, and there wasn't a dry eye in the whole house, and they came afterwards. We were talking about it. They were talking about it and how, how the Trinity was portrayed and all. And it was just really a really amazing and bonding experience that night. So.
Oh, neat. Well, thanks for sharing that. Yeah, that was one. Of course, I had Octavia Spencer up there
Right.
earlier. It was a book, of course, much earlier than it was a film, and some churches did studies
Right.
and other things around that. But I think when it became a film, it opened up some new avenues for sharing, and it does have a different kind of shared experience, I think, when you're watching it.
Right. I
I
actually
like that.
preferred the book.
Yeah, there's always that debate between people, what's better, the book or the movie, and that varies from one to one for me, but I'm glad you all had that experience. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, Christina? I can't hear you.
We couldn't hear her in the breakout. We're not sure what's wrong.
Okay.
So Christina, it may be your mic setting, although I just saw audio come through. Try again. Christina, try selecting another mic and just, yeah, not hearing you yet. But feel free, if you have a comment, to type it in the chat and I'll speak it for you.
In the meantime, if there's any others, can give a few minutes here. Susan?
Now can you hear me? No?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Christina.
Yeah, go ahead, Christina, and then we'll come back to Susan.
No, I don't have any question. I just wanted to check whether you can hear me or not, but thank you.
In our group, we talked about camp, and I think that has a lot to do with relationship and nature. It's a bonding experience to be at a camp ministry or even just camping or hiking, and that's not media related. We also talked about the women's retreat, and we went to see the Shack in our church too in Florida. Something that I was thinking of it, and it was on this screen, but a lot of people saw it in person, but it's also sort of related to media because it was an acting out. But one thing that really called me to a deeper relationship in the very beginning of my coming to the Church of the Brethren was seeing the mime skit sort of from annual conference that was sort of displaying like God wants all of you, and I'll just never forget that was just a touching moment that I felt God moving.
Yeah, it's interesting. Me certainly, and I suspect a few others on here, camp and those kind of settings would be a similar kind of place. And looking at one of my former camp directors down in the corner of my screen as I say that. And it's interesting because it's kind of in many ways the antithesis or opposite of media. It's one of those places that we get away from, that one of the few places for some of us in our lives. And yet both that and being in movies and other things have both spoken to me in different ways with those kind of experiences, which maybe says something about the complexity of the divine, that there's those different tendrils that reach out to us in different places, perhaps.
And I would add Christian concerts to me. I really feel God. And so I'm excited this year. I finally get to go to Song and Story Fest and sort of combine the two of music and camp. So I'm only going to stay a couple days, but yeah.
Amen. I think a lot of us are looking forward to those gatherings again. To one or two more, I see Christina has her hand back up. Let me go over to her. Just unmute yourself and share there.
At that time, I was more worried about being heard. So I have a story now, and I wanted to share it with my group, but I couldn't. when this year, I'm a tutor also. I have two jobs. I'm the pastor of a church, and then I'm a tutor. So at the beginning of this school year, I was tutoring, and there was a kid in kindergarten who just did not learn anything. He just sat there and did nothing. So every morning I used to pray and teach him. Every morning I used to pray for him by his name, and then go and teach him the alphabet and the numbers and everything. And everybody used to tease, make fun of him and say, he has a brain tumor, he'll never learn. So within 3 months, I was able to teach him the letters, all the letters, numbers from 1 to 20, and his name, how to write his name. So when I went to the teacher and I said, he knows his alphabet and he knows his number 1 to 20 and he knows how to write his name, she didn't believe me. She said, no, he doesn't know anything. So I said, come here. I brought a whiteboard and a marker, and I said, I said the alphabet, and he wrote whatever I said, he wrote the alphabet. The teacher's mouth fell. She said, what? She couldn't believe it. And then I told her that every morning before I came to work, I prayed for this boy. And this is the result. It's God, it's not me. Still today, during the meetings, she just says without any, she doesn't hold back. She just says, it is God who helps us. It's God who helps us. So it's God, I have never been able to get over that experience. God was so real.
It's almost like, sorry, yeah, thanks for sharing. That's almost like movies unfolding before us in real life, when you have those endings that kind of pull at our heartstrings and go. And like you say, you see the power of prayer flowing in those. So thank you. I'll take one more yet if anyone has, and then gonna hop back on to sharing here. Anyone else have a last comment on this section? I'm not seeing any phalanges there, so let me pop back into screen sharing here. One of the things I think is interesting is that sometimes films are those kind of larger religious experiences for us, but sometimes there are just little bits or sparks or morsels that speak to us. We find within a film or within a TV show or something else that we experience, that little nugget of something that touches something within us and keeps resonating. And it brought to mind these words from John Calvin that said, there's no spot in the universe where we cannot detect at least some sparks of God's glory. I don't know if he always felt that way about Anabaptists, given the way he treated them occasionally in the early years. But I think it's intriguing, that idea that anywhere we look, that we can find some of those divine sparks. I think one of the blessings and curses of being a pastor is that, with working on sermons every week, that everything you look at and everything you hear becomes a possibility for a sermon illustration. And so they're always kind of reverberating in your head. But I think for any of us, there's always those possibilities of catching sparks of that somewhere we are, almost like fireflies or lightning bugs, depending where you're from, flashing to us with that message. And this isn't necessarily a new thing either. I think a lot of times we think about some of these movies as being, more recent, or the TV shows coming, and there are a lot that have been. But when I was doing some of my research, I found an article that talked about the development of Superman, the comic character. And it was back in the late 30s that Superman was coming to be. And the article about him here said, you look at Superman and he doesn't, he just seems like the average Western superhero, but dug down a little bit and started tugging at some of the details of the Superman story. And for example, his original name back on his planet of Krypton, Kal-El, translates from Hebrew to being the voice of God or the presence of God. And looked at the truth, justice, and the American way with some of the pillars that are shared in the Mishnah of Judaism. And keep in mind what else was happening in the late 30s around the world. If you think about the historical time period, of course, that's World War II, the Holocaust. And so they were doing some analysis of this and noted the similarities between the Holocaust and the destruction of Superman's planet at the start of the series. Noted a lot of ties to Superman and the biblical character of Moses, being put in a vessel and sent off to be able to find safety and so on. And they tracked down the author, who was not Jewish, but grew up in an area of Cleveland, Ohio that had a large Jewish population and was very concerned with the anti-Semitism that was happening around that time. And so he said he did develop Superman as somebody that could speak to some of that. And so while he himself was not Jewish, the creation of Superman was informed by some of those Jewish ideals and principles in history. So much so that the Nazis actually started a campaign against Superman, saying that he was a pleasant guy with an overdeveloped body and an underdeveloped mind, created by someone who was intellectually and physically circumcised and has his headquarters in New York. And this is in the late 30s and 40s. And so going back over the history of media, we have these attempts to be able to use it as a vehicle for sharing religious expression and thoughts and ideas, sometimes in social justice, sometimes more theological, sometimes for other purposes that we're going to explore some together. With that, I want to take a quick romp here through 7 categories that I've created of different films and TV shows that have some of these religious threads. Not exhaustive by any means. I suspect any of you might be able to add some to these lists. So if you think of ones you don't see here, feel free to make mental additions. And as we're talking later, encourage you to bring those to the forefront too. Some of them I had difficulty deciding what category to put them in, and so feel free to push back on some of those as well. And the categories, I should say, are not anything necessarily scientific. They're just groupings that I saw as I went through. So without further ado, start with the ones that I would call overtly Christian media. Most of these are put out by church groups or parachurch groups with the particular goal of advancing a Christian message, a form of evangelism, really. Some of those very familiar, and we're going to take a look at some of these clips later. This is just going to be kind of your quick overview. But everything from movies like Facing the Giants and Fireproof, which are a definite fictional movie, but drawing very much on Christian themes, to something like The Passion of the Christ, which is one writer and director's attempt to be able to tell the story of Christ in a fairly literal and gritty reality that was embraced by some people and turned off others, to something like VeggieTales, where you have singing tomatoes and cucumbers and other members of the produce spectrum telling stories about God and the Bible. Second category I noted are ones that are more generally religious and or spiritual. And these include a whole host of them. Interestingly, there was a wave right around the start of the 2000s that introduced quite a few different shows and movies here, especially TV shows. There actually was a TV Guide article about it at the time called TV Goes with God. And again, this was in the early 2000s, kind of 2002, 3, 4, that a wave of them came. Now, I mentioned about with Superman, kind of, shaped by its times there with World War II. And we often find, of course, that media is shaped by its times. So what can you think of? And again, feel free to unmute yourself or stick up a phalange there. What was going on in the early 2000s that might have fomented a surge of religious and spiritual media? Any guesses?
Not 9/11.
There you go, bonus points. Yes, 9/11, of course, happened in September of 2001. And so there was a lot of sense that people were looking for some groundedness and connection and something beyond themselves to have hope in. And so you had this flood of shows. Most of them didn't last real long, but there was Joan of Arcadia, which is the first one listed here. There was a couple shows, Dead Like Me and 6 Feet Under, kind of communicating with those who had gone on before for a sense of hope. There were another one called True Calling, Wonder Falls. Most of these you probably haven't heard of because they only lasted a season or two. But you can
They also
find
had like Y2K, you know, they said the world was going to end when we hit 2000 first.
Yeah, that's true. You had a lot of the apocalyptic stuff right before that too. And then we had kind of a seeming apocalypse with the events of 9/11 not long after we thought we had dodged a proverbial bullet there. So yeah, there was a lot going on in that time period. And there's been a surge of some, again, recently. God Friended Me was just in the past year or two here that was on. And there's some others we'll be touching on here. And I think maybe some of the turbulence of these times and some of the divide and conflicts we've been seeing may contribute to that as well. Some of the ones on here, of course, older ones like Highway to Heaven, the Michael Landon one back in the 80s, 90s, mentioned the George Burns movies, Arrow Gods, Sister Act with Whoopi Goldberg. And these are very different types of films. Some are more dramatic, some are more comedy, some kind of in between. Bruce Almighty we'll take a look at later, I think is one of the most interesting intersections of popular culture and religion, that it's not a religious movie per se, and yet kind of is. So I said, we'll take a look at that. Five People You Meet in Heaven, Mitch Albom in his books has done a number of explorations and wrestling with these kind of topics. One of my favorite authors, The Chronicles of Narnia, which is a little closer to that overtly Christian, taking some of C.S. Lewis's work, but a little more below the surface than those. So again, a sampling collection, not an exhaustive list. Would move from that into ones that are a little bit more tangential and subtle, where religion isn't the main focus of the plot as it is in some of the others. I almost moved Chocolat up into that previous category because there is a lot of religious thread in that. And that's one, if you ever want a movie to watch at church and do a discussion about, I think it has a lot of fascinating stuff in it. Also have some of the sci-fi ones on here, was talking about earlier, like the Star Trek, Star Wars, some of the Indiana Jones films do some interesting things with that. Again, it's not the main thrust, but there's definite waves of that, ripples, threads going through them. St. Vincent, one I have at the bottom, I don't think we'll look at tonight. If you're easily offended by profanity, it is not the movie for you. It has Bill Murray as the title character, but has some incredible storyline in there about what does it mean to be a saint, and looking for those qualities of the divine in people we might not expect. Gran Torino, the Clint Eastwood one, another one that's not for the weak of heart perhaps, but has some powerful messages within it, all the way back to something like It's a Wonderful Life, when I said it hasn't just been a recent phenomenon. You know, there it's not all about religion, but you have an angel that's helping to show the way. I did a separate category in here for musicals. There's a collection here kind of lumped together from ones that are very much Christian and spiritual, like Jesus Christ Superstar, to ones that are very much not, like the Book of Mormon. And of course, Fiddler on the Roof have in there between probably one of the most prominent portrayals of Jewish religious life that we have in popular media outside of some of the movies about the Holocaust. On that note, another category spelled out here with those that are more historical or literary, either from the biblical stories themselves, things like, of course, the Ten Commandments with Charlton Heston, the animated The Prince of Egypt, Ben-Hur, One Night with the King, which is a story about Queen Esther, Last Temptation of Christ, another one of those that was embraced by some and boycotted or pushed back against by others. The lower left one there, I actually just learned about recently, called The Chosen. It's a streaming series that's on now. You can find, I believe, most of the episodes online. It's just in its second season, but trying to very realistically and grittily portray the life of Jesus and the disciples in the time of the New Testament. So that's a very current one. Over on the other side, stories that are more about figures that were connected to religious themes in some way. Mentioned Schindler's List before, of course. Cross and the Switchblade about a missionary, that one some decades ago. Amazing Grace about slavery and Abernathy and the fight to legalize slavery in England. And Hacksaw Ridge and The Hidden Life are both movies about conscientious objectors, one in Europe, one in the US. Neither one with Brethren connections that I know of, but tie into some Brethren themes with that. Probably the most difficult category for many of us, those that do satire or critique, sometimes shining a helpful light on things to help us take a less serious or more introspective look at ourselves, sometimes rather painful and scathing, and sometimes very difficult to see, ones that take a microscope on religion, sometimes from people that have experienced pain because of religion, trauma, some that look at it and see flaws there, which I think if any of us are honest, we can look and see some flaws as well. And some that are kind of in between, and we'll take a look at a few of those later too. And then the last category I put in here were ones that are what I'm going to call spiritual-ish, which have religious or loosely religious themes, but are not really a religious story in the way that some of the others are. They often are more comedic or I don't know quite what to call some of them, but for example, Noah that's on there is in some ways a retelling of the story of Noah from the Hebrew scriptures, but also puts a lot of fictional pieces and imaginative pieces in it to try to expand the story. And so again, it was something that some Christians thought was meaningful and others kind of took offense at. The Da Vinci Code has some religious themes in, and some of the others there perhaps you've seen. The Book of Eli was the hardest one to categorize because it does have some definite religious pieces in it and has been embraced in some parts of the Christian church, but it does it in a very non-conventional, outside the box kind of way. I'm not going to give it away beyond that in case some of you haven't seen and are curious.
Yeah, well, these are a little dangerous. I know somebody who just swore that the Da Vinci Code was, truth. So these can be taken as people say, see, this is what really is, and it's not really the truth of what's biblically sound, Some
Well,
might
exactly.
say the
That's
shack
why they're
is
in this,
like that.
that's why they're
I
in
have
this last
heard
category. Like I said, that's why it's labeled spiritual-ish, that I wouldn't consider them church viewing by any means, and they take pieces of religious things and then spin them in other ways. If there's anyone on here that might be worth viewing, it's the Book of Eli. Wouldn't do it with kids, but if you have an adult audience and could wrestle with some of the themes, it has some worthwhile tendrils of discussion, I think. So a lot of the other ones, yeah, go into some rather questionable territory with those. I see a number of things in the chat here, so I want to pause. Etten, can you help me look there if we have any questions?
Sure.
Pause here at this time, and then after that, we'll take a break.
Walt, there was just a lot of other suggestions about different movies. The Case for Christ was one, and then other people thought of Doctor Who and E.T. Of course, you had mentioned the Chronicles of Narnia, but also The Hiding Place. So just people are also being creative and thinking of things that we could add to your list.
Perfect. That's just what we want. And yeah, some good ones. Hiding Place is another favorite. I've never seen the movie. I've read the book and actually got to act in a stage production of it in high school. But that's a excellent one to add on there, as well as some of the others. E.T., yeah, has some very interesting stuff. Spielberg in general does some interesting things with some of these themes, Jewish, of course, but also has some things that have resonated, I think, with Christian viewers as well over time, and some of the others you have on there as well. So yeah, thanks for sharing those. Appreciate that. Oh, I just saw My Name is Earl pop up there. I loved watching that. And yeah, the whole idea of karma in there and kind of how what we do affects others in different ways. Very good one. I haven't seen that in years. A number of you mentioned some sci-fi ones in there. We'll tease a little at that with some of the clips we look at later. I'm not going to do a lot with that tonight, even though it's one of my favorites, because Steve Schweitzer at Bethany has an excellent class on that and has done some presentations. He covers Doctor Who and Star Trek and Star Wars especially. And so I'd encourage you, if you have interest in that, to take one of his sometime. And I just saw Amen pop up on here. That's the one. It had, was it Sherman Hensley, I think, was the actor in that. That was back like 80s or 90s. That's the one I'm thinking of. That was a long while ago. I haven't seen that in ages, but yeah, it takes place inside a church setting, has some interesting characters there. So yeah, we could add and add, and that's fascinating to me, just how long some of those lists can be. We're going to take a break here, and I encourage you, while you do that, to continue chewing on some of those. And if you're still in the point where you're having dinner, feel free to continue chewing on that too. We'll take just about 5 minutes or so here, a break, which I think Enton would bring us back like 8 or 9 after the hour.
Sounds good, Walt.
All right, we'll see you all in just a little bit.
And so I think it's about time for us to start again, Walt. Not everyone is back yet, but hopefully they will be soon. And I don't want to cut you too short on all that you want to accomplish yet.
That's all right. We can do more or less clips here depending on time. And I want to give some time for you all to do a little discussion of those in your breakout groups, as well as other things that may have come up during the time here. But yeah, we're going to turn now and actually view some of the clips so that we can interact with some of these. Before we get into some of the longer clips, and I realize some of you probably have seen some of these before, some of you perhaps many times, others not at all, so I'll try to give a little context to most of them as we go in. If that's repeat for you, just feel free to gaze off into the distance at that. But even if you have seen this a number of times before, I want you to try very intentionally tonight to do that through this lens of thinking theologically about what you're seeing. How does it resonate with your faith? How does it not? Does it open any new awakenings for you? Does it raise questions for you? Is it helpful? Is it not helpful? Etc. Two, I want to show here just real briefly at the beginning. One is not an actual clip, but just a screenshot that Enton's going to put up for us here. You may have heard of a site called GodTube, and it's kind of the Christian answer to YouTube and CNN and some other things put together. As you see there, there's some news pieces, some Christian music videos, other videos, podcasts, has different polls, etc. Just about anything that you could want from the Christian media world, you can find on a hub here. It has a fairly evangelical focus, so depending on your theology, it may be more or less appealing in the presentation. But just to point that out as a resource, as Christians are thinking about ways that they can use media as a ministry tool, that's one that could be interesting to explore. The other one here, if nothing else, just for a little bit of feel good, I suspect most of you have seen it somewhere. I want to have Enton play just a brief clip from those Talking Produce family members of VeggieTales, and think about, if you were the creator of this, how would you come up with this platform as a way of sharing the stories of the Bible? Go ahead, Enton, if you'd put that on up for us.
You know that in love we can forgive. It is the only way to live. Obey God and see that we can live in harmony. Since God has forgiven us, it's true. You forgive me, I'll forgive you. I'm gonna start to show forgiveness from my heart.
That's probably good enough, Enton. Gives us a flavor. And I saw one of our younger viewers here bopping along with it, so I thought I'd give her a little run, but glad you could join us tonight, by the way. You know, in some ways it feels like a silly thing to have singing asparagus and tomatoes and all of that. But for a lot of people, especially for kids, that has been an important way of learning some of those stories of the Bible. And not just kids, but some of you may know Marcus Inhauser, who was the Church of the Brethren mission planner in Brazil. And he told a story once to the Mission and Ministry Board that as he was trying to conceive what church should look like there, and had seen some of the local ones there and found it lacking, that he came across an episode of VeggieTales and saw Larry the Cucumber talking about putting faith into action, and thought, that's what's been missing. And that's kind of what led him into looking to learn more about the Brethren and putting faith into action. He had seen a lot of churches where they did rah-rah worship and did a lot of stuff within the church, but that idea of going out and sharing the message through service elsewhere, he said, who would have thought you could learn such lessons from a talking cucumber? And so, yes, we have part of the Church of the Brethren mission in Brazil, thanks to VeggieTales. So that was just a couple quick samples on that one. I want to spend a little more time, though, with some of these others. The next one I want to go to is from Joan of Arcadia, which I mentioned earlier. Came out again in the early 2000s. I think it was probably one of the more potent things that media has done as far as getting us to think about how we interact with God and how God might try to speak to us in a variety of ways and forms. It was on CBS for 2 seasons, was supposed to go for a third, and they canceled it at the last moment, left it in a cliffhanger at the end, for which I've never quite forgiven CBS. But in those 2 seasons, they had some wonderful episodes. It's about a teenage girl in Arcadia, Maryland. Obviously, Joan of Arcadia, kind of a play on Joan of Arc, where supposedly, God was speaking to Joan there and giving the messages. But this one happens in current day and time. And Joan starts to have these unexpected encounters. And the clip I want to show here is just about 2 minutes long, but it comes from the very first pilot episode of the series. And it's when Joan has one of her first encounters with this unexpected person in her life. So I'll just say that for now and go ahead and roll the clip.
You being snippy with me? God is snippy.
Let me explain something to you, Joan. It goes like this. I don't look like this. I don't look like anything you'd recognize. You can't see me. I don't sound like this. I don't sound like anything you'd recognize. You see, I'm beyond your experience. I take this form because you're comfortable with it. It makes sense to you. And if I'm snippy, it's because you understand snippy. Do you get it?
Sort of.
Good. Because I'm really not snippy. I've got a great personality. You'd like me.
Oh, I'm not religious,
It's not about religion, Joan. It's about fulfilling your nature.
Oh, I definitely haven't done that.
Exactly.
Well, let's say you're God.
Joan, I am God.
Okay, well, let's see a miracle.
Okay. How about that?
That's a tree.
Let's see you make one.
So, do you just go around appearing to people?
Minor correction. I'm not appearing to you. You are seeing me.
Okay.
Like I said, I just found this show fascinating. I bought the DVDs so I could have them here. The interesting thing is that as it unfolds, God gives Joan various tasks to do, which are not always apparent why she's doing them. But over the course of the episode, of course, those pieces come together and she learns some lessons along the way. The other interesting thing is that in this episode, of course, God comes as a white teenage guy that she kind of resonates, because she says at one point, is it wrong that I have a crush on God? But the God character says, other times you see me, that's not going to be a problem. And God comes to her in all sorts of shapes and forms. It's a black lunch lady, it's a Latino janitor, it's a little girl, it's an old person, it's all over the map. And so that idea of God kind of defying our expectations and the limitations that we try to put, just a lot of stuff in there. If you haven't ever seen it, I encourage you. You can find some of the episodes on various streaming platforms online. And one more I want to show here in this category And this is in that generally religious spiritual where religion is a focus. But as you heard in that one, it's not necessarily a overtly Christian expression of faith. You know, he says it's not about religion, it's fulfilling your nature. So kind of more the commonality of religion, this deeper search for meaning and identity for us. The last one I want to show, though, comes from a very different place. It's one of the only ones I have been able to find anywhere in media, in Western media at least, that focuses on Islam. Perhaps not coincidentally, it's from the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, CBC. And they did a series that ran for a number of seasons up there called Little Mosque on the Prairie. It takes place, I forget if it was in Manitoba or Saskatchewan, and follows the adventures of this young imam who is called to serve a mosque in this town out in rural Canada somewhere, and the interactions with the town and the surrounding community that follow. I couldn't find any good clips online. There was either full episodes, which you can find if you search for it, again, Little Mosque on the Prairie. So in lieu of that, this is just a trailer from the show that I found that give you a little flavor of what it's like. So Enton, if you want to go ahead with Little Mosque.
Bobber.
Bobber?
Yes, sir! Reverend McGee.
Hey, Amar.
Afternoon, Amar. Sarah, what's wrong?
What's wrong with Rayan? Thanks, Fatima.
Something to do with Muslims.
Everybody say goodbye to Layla's ears. They're gone for good. Allah have mercy on me.
Oh, Islam says jump. I say, oh, hi.
Yes. Yes.
Sit. Allah is the only God and all that.
Measured, thoughtful perspectives on Islam and modern spirituality in a relaxed, accessible atmosphere.
Is the mosque building a hydrogen bomb?
You got people walking down Main Street in burqas. Next thing you know, you got public beheadings and people eating figs.
What are you having?
Burning, searing pain in my chest.
Got it. One spicy curry.
Today, we become a mosque for all people.
Sleep like a woman. Oh, mercy.
Well, I hope you enjoy our little town.
So again, about the only one I could find that has Islam as its main thrust on there, which I thought was quite interesting. We actually, when I was at Manchester, did a little study group around this. If you're curious, I encourage you to check it out. I want to do a couple other clips here then, and gonna give you a chance to discuss some of what you've seen, and want to check for others that popped. I know some other favorites coming in the chat here. I encourage you to keep adding those. Lots of good stuff out there. The one I want to turn to now is, I mentioned earlier, one of my very favorites. I used this in the class at Manchester. I've used examples elsewhere. And for a movie produced by a non-Christian publishing house, at least not specifically one, you know, like some of the movies like Facing the Giants or Fireproof, I think it does one of the most wonderful jobs of wrestling with themes of faith, and that's Bruce Almighty. Well cast, of course, with the actors in that. Some people have said Morgan Freeman is kind of like meant to play God because he has that voice, you know, that captures it and just seems to have the bearing and all in the film. So whatever your opinions of that, would like you to watch, and this will be the longest clip we'll watch because I think it has a lot of good stuff in it. It's 4 or 5 minutes long, I believe. But take a look at Bruce Almighty, and again, if you've seen it before, try to look at it again, specifically through this lens that we're talking about tonight. Go ahead with Bruce.
This looks promising.
Hello? Another gigantic, ginormic waste of my life. Hello? Yo, I'm looking for whoever runs this joint.
Be right with you. I'm trying to fix a light. Tell me if it's working.
Yeah, seems to be. Kind of bright, though.
Yeah, it is for most people. Spend their lives in the dark, trying to hide from me.
Well, the elevator's broken, huh?
Yeah, but I'll get around to it.
You installed the clapper?
No, but catch a jingle, isn't it? Clap on, clap off, clap on, clap off, the clapper. Just can't get it out of my head, man.
Oh, good luck with that. I'm gonna go now.
Okay, but the boss will be right out. You must be Bruce. I've been expecting you.
This is hilarious. So you're the boss and the electrician and the janitor. Must be a killer Christmas party. Don't get drunk, though. One of you might need a ride home.
You always were funny, Bruce. Just like your father. He didn't mind rolling up his sleeves either, son. People underestimate the benefit of good old manual labor. It's freedom in it. Some of the happiest people in the world go home smelling to high heavens at the end of the day.
All right, what is this? How do you know my father, and how'd you get my pager number?
Oh, I know quite a lot about you, Bruce. Just about everything there is to know. Everything you've ever said, or done, or thought about doing. Right there in that file cabinet.
Wow, a whole drawer just for me. Mind if I take a look?
Sure like.
This ought to be good.
Now, this last entry was a little disturbing. Gloves are off, God. God has taken my bird and my bush. God is a mean kid with a magnifying glass. Smite me, O mighty smiter. Now, I'm not much for blaspheming, but that last one made me laugh.
Are you spying on me? Who are you?
I'm the one. Creator of the heavens and the earth. Alpha and Omega. Bruce, I'm God.
Bingo! Yahtzee! Is that your final answer? Our service has God! Bing, 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 bing. Well, it was nice to meet you, God. Thank you for the Grand Canyon, and good luck with the apocalypse. Oh, and by the way, you suck! You know what would have been a little bit more impressive, though? If you hadn't used the cheesy file cabinet illusion. Anybody with a brainstem can tell that that drawer is being fed through the wall from the other side. All you have to do is find the crease right around here. There is a seam here, or a hollow spot.
Where? Through the drywall and concrete?
Okay, that is a good one. That is a good one. Okay, how many fingers am I holding up?
Now, Bruce, thou shalt not tempt the Lord
Hey, if you
thy
can't
God.
do it, man, that's cool.
3, 2, 4, 9, 6, 8, 1.
Okay. How many now?
7.
Aha!
One of those that somehow just brilliantly blends the slapstick comedy of Jim Carrey with some pretty good theological depth. The questions of where is God when I'm suffering and everything is going wrong, to the idea of, well, you know, if I were God, I would do a whole lot better job than God is doing now, and exploring some of those questions and what does it mean. I want to look at two more here, and then we'll give you some chance to talk a little bit. And by the way, I, during that, got to take a quick peek there. Somebody mentioned Lilies of the Field, which I have not seen, but have heard some really good things about. And one is on my list sometimes, so thank you for mentioning that. Susan mentioned Right Now Media as a source, especially for things in worship and especially with kids, is good. And there's some claymation and others. So we can take a look through some of those and continue adding. Like I said, there's a lot to draw upon. I want to pull just a couple from that more tangential, subtle category. And the first one, like I said, I'm not going to go deeply into sci-fi because Steve Schweitzer does such a good job with it. but want to show a clip that I've always found rather interesting. It's from the 5th Star Trek movie. It's called The Final Frontier, and it's a really weird movie. It's by far not the best in the franchise. They go off on the Enterprise trying to find God at the center of the universe by breaching the galactic barrier and coming to this wacky planet. And when they get there, they have the encounter that you're going to see in the scene before you. There's this Vulcan fellow in a robe that's the one kind of leading the hunt, and he's the one that really thinks that they have finally found God when they come to this place. So this is just about 2 minutes long. If you're not familiar with Star Trek, you won't recognize all the characters, but that's all right. Go ahead and let's go to a Final Frontier.
Is this the voice of God? One voice, many faces. Does this better suit your expectations? It is I. The journey you undertook to reach me could not have been an easy one.
It was not. The barrier stood between us, but we breached it.
Magnificent. You are the first to find me.
We sought only your infinite wisdom.
And how did you breach the barrier?
With a starship.
This starship, could it carry my wisdom beyond the barrier?
It could, yes.
Then I shall make use of this starship.
It will be your chariot. Excuse me.
It will carry my power to every corner of creation.
Excuse me, I'd just like to ask a question. What does God need with a starship?
Bring the ship closer.
I said, what does God need with a starship? Jim, what are you doing? I'm asking you a question.
Who is this creature?
Who am I? Don't you know? Aren't you God?
He has his doubts.
You doubt me?
I seek proof. Jim, you don't ask the Almighty for his ID.
Then here is the proof you see.
So again, some interesting themes in there. And later, the doctor, the one that's talking with the guy that just got zapped there, Captain Kirk, sees a couple of these other zappings, and God asks, "What about you? Do you doubt me too?" And he says, "I doubt any God that would inflict pain and suffering for their own pleasure." So there's some interesting theological things there within a not so great movie. In that same vein, I want to show one more here, and another one that's fairly familiar, I think, from the Indiana Jones series. This is from the 3rd movie, The Last Crusade. So let's go ahead and look at that short clip.
Impossible. Nobody can jump this.
Indy! And you must hurry! Come quickly!
It's a leap of faith. You must believe, boy. You must believe.
So in that one, he's on the quest for the Holy Grail, and all the obstacles along the way have these different theological flavors to them. Eventually, he encounters an old knight, and well, you can watch the rest if you haven't seen it. By the way, in the Star Trek one, that God character proves to be just a malevolent energy being that wants to destroy the universe. Spoiler alert, but the movie's almost 30 years old, so if you haven't seen it now, not God. But that just gives you a sampling of some of these that have faith more front and center, or at least woven in some ways. So I want to give you a little bit of time now as we go back into breakout rooms. Oh, and by the way, somebody put Encanto into the chat, which I finally just saw on Saturday as I was flying back from Seattle, and it did have some really interesting stuff there about miracles and how those might weave into our life. So yeah, some good stuff there. Thanks for mentioning that one. But in your breakout groups, invite you to talk about the clips that we've seen here so far. Are there any that particularly resonated with you, or other pieces from those works? Talk about maybe the portrayal of God and faith. What do you find helpful and not helpful? And if there's anything else that comes to you from others you've seen. So thoughts on the clips, portrayals of God and faith, and anything else. We'll give you about 8 minutes in the groups here, so you have some time to discuss. We'll come back and discuss briefly, and then have a few last clips, and then wrap things up. So go ahead and let Enton send you to your breakouts.
Okay, friends, here we go. It'll be different groupings than we had before, and so I hope you enjoy the conversation. Welcome back, friends. You're coming back in. Well, Walt, I think we're back from breakout, and so feel free to take us away again.
All right, welcome back, everybody. As before, just want to give a few minutes here. If anyone had any reflections or thoughts from their discussion groups, anything that stood out for you, or anything that arose from your discussion around these themes that might want to share with the group. I see some more popping in the chat too. Keep sharing those, but feel free to unmute yourself or wave a hand if you have any brief thoughts from that time.
Eleanor, I've seen you unmuted. Would you like to share?
Oh, I was thinking about it. This isn't anything I said in the group, but I tend to fall on the more progressive side of theology, and I don't think we're as good at creating that kind of media content as our conservative friends. I mean, I look at the Passion of Christ, and I mean, I don't, but I've read about it, and that's not my cup of tea, but I'm certain that there are all kinds of people that would be very interested in Jesus' story, not told in that kind of told in a different way. And that's what all media is. That's what all stories are, is the perspective on how you tell a story.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm curious to see this new series I mentioned earlier, The Chosen. I've gotten a sense that that shows maybe some of the grittier, working with the people side of Jesus and some of the others, but I haven't seen it yet, so I can't say that for
actually saw
certain.
one episode in a group of very conservative Christians, and I thought it was very well done, but I only saw one episode. I was quite pleased with it. I thought it was well represented of a particular story that they were telling.
Yeah, I've heard some good things. And of course, there have been some theology pieces mentioned earlier that would lean more toward the social justice end of faith, like, for example, something like Amistad or Amazing Grace, again, the abolitionist movement, things in that vein. Not so much the story of Jesus told through that lens, as frequently, but some of the stories of those who were perhaps inspired by that stream of thought.
This is Nancy. I actually am watching The Chosen. I am doing a Bible study with our Catholic brothers and sisters. They're into nonviolent Bible study, and we are watching The Chosen right now.
Good. That's good perspective to hear. I'm eager to check it out. Thanks, Nancy.
Mm-hmm.
We have our church is binging The Chosen. They like it so much, and I would highly recommend it. I love one of the things we were talking about in our group, and one of the things I love about The Chosen, the Shack, Bruce Almighty. I love how our traditions can cause us to limit our views and understandings of God. And I think these films often are spoken poorly about, like, oh, that's awful, that's terrible, because we're so bound by our traditional views. But I think that we limit the awesomeness of God and what God can truly be and how he can portray himself to each of us in a very personal way. And I think these films and these shows, The Chosen and different things, begin to show us that. And so I think they're amazing.
Yeah, and I was thinking, I was saying in one of my groups that those films might be seen by people that wouldn't normally see something that we would consider correct theology, right? So it's God working to reach people in ways that, they will react to. Yeah.
When you consider the diversity of theology within our denomination, let alone within the country, it's not surprising that you'd have a diverse expression of that coming through in the media and various places, as those who come from different perspectives tell the stories from their point of view. Well, with that, we're getting near the end of our time, and there are a few clips I want to share with you yet, and some of these get into the harder territory of ones that are more satire and critique, perhaps beyond that. The first one I want to show is from a movie that inspired a lot of negative reaction in the faith community, and I think the clip I pulled is probably one of the few that I could show to a church group. It's a rather profanity and profanity-laden and iconoclastic movie in a lot of ways. If you can get below that, there's also a lot of interesting theological themes to tug at. But again, it's one of those that you have to watch carefully and know what you're getting into going in. It's about two fallen angels that try to find their way back to heaven without bringing about the end of earth and all the things that ensue. So this is a clip with George Carlin as a priest who is trying to reform the image of the Catholic Church within the movie. So go ahead if you would roll that one for us and see what you all think here.
I'm not sure which clip that is, Walt. Do you have the title of it?
It might be under like Buddy Jesus. Have any in that vein? If we don't have it, we can skip that one. That's all right.
I'm looking for it. I think it was off your short list. So I know it's there somewhere. I just need to locate it. Got it. Dogma. Yes, got it. Coming up.
And while that's, oh, here we go.
Ladies and gentlemen, the driving force behind Catholicism Wow, Cardinal Glick.
Thank you. Now, we all know how the majority and the media in this country view the Catholic Church. They think of us as a passé, archaic institution. People find the Bible obtuse, even hokey. Now, in an effort to disprove all that, the Church has appointed this year as a time of renewal, both of faith and of style. For example, the crucifix. While it has been a time-honored symbol of our faith, Holy Mother Church has decided to retire this highly recognizable yet wholly depressing image of our Lord crucified. Christ didn't come to earth to give us the willies. He came to help us out. He was a booster. And it's with that take on our Lord in mind that we've come up with a new, more inspiring sigil. So, it is with great pleasure that I present you with the first of many revamps the Catholicism Wow campaign will unveil over the next year. I give you the Buddy Christ. But that's not the sanctioned term we're using for the symbol, just something we've been kicking around the office. But look at it. Doesn't it pop? Buddy Christ.
So again, one example of some satire there. Want to hop right into two others here briefly. One is from the animated series The Simpsons that has been going for over 30 years now on network television, amazingly. It was created by Matt Groening, who comes from historically a Mennonite family. He himself is not Mennonite, but had a lot of those influences. And so some of that pops up sometimes in the series along with other flavors of faith. I find it interesting that for all of the satire and jokes at the expense of faith within the series, the family, the Simpsons, is a member family of a church, goes there every Sunday, has regular interactions with the pastor for all of the skewering that happens. It is woven into the tapestry of the community too, which I find quite interesting. And by the way, if you're familiar at all, you know one of the title characters is Homer Simpson. Matt Groening's grandfather, Homer, was a Mennonite pastor. I believe it was his grandfather. And so that's where the name comes from. And there's other inspirations like that through. God makes regular appearances from time to time here in the show. And so I just wanted to show you a brief clip of one of those. So if we can roll The Simpsons, please.
Homie,
Can't talk, praying. Dear Lord, the gods have been good to me and I am thankful. For the first time in my life, everything is absolutely perfect just the way it is. So here's the deal. You freeze everything as it is and I won't ask for anything more. If that is okay, please give me absolutely no sign. Okay, deal. In gratitude, I present you this offering of cookies and milk. If you want me to eat them for you, give me no sign. That will be done.
So just a brief snippet there, and God appears, like I said, in various things. The last one I want to show is the most current one, a show that just ended a couple years ago, and there's still the spinoff going. This is from The Big Bang Theory, a spinoff now Young Sheldon is on. If you've seen Young Sheldon, the mother is a very evangelical church member and weaves that into the family life, and the pastor on that show is also a regular character. In The Big Bang Theory, it's interesting because it's a science-focused show. The main characters are all scientists, but one of them is Jewish, one of them is Hindu, one of them is kind of an atheist, and the other one is kind of in between with various influences. Again, this evangelical mother and has kind of rejected faith, but she's always popping up and trying to pull him back to that side. And so this is a clip from an episode where they all are going to church or something that she's led them there to try to reform. So go ahead and let's look at The Big Bang Theory.
Hey, while we're here, why don't we all do some praying? Let's put a little church in this church.
Oh, I'm not sure we should.
It's easy. I'll show you how. Lord, Mary Cooper here, coming to you from Gomorrah, California. I want to thank you for the blessing that is my little Shelley. I also want to thank you for the continued strength not to cold cock him with my Bible. All right, Penny, your turn.
Okay. Hey, God, what's up? I'm good, but it would be a big help to my family if you could get my brother to stop cooking meth. But no cops, be cool.
She also goes a little overboard on the love thy neighbor. Could probably use that chat you had with Mary Magdalene. Leonard, you're up. Wasserman, you're on deck.
Okay, I don't know. It's probably a little late to ask you to make me taller.
if you could help out with me and my girlfriend, she's all the way in India, that would be great.
Hear that, girl trouble? Turns out we were both wrong on that front. How about you?
No, thanks. I'm good. I'm really just trying not to burst into flames.
Rajesh?
He says he's having trouble dropping those last 5 pounds.
I might have gone with the talking to girls thing.
Yeah, no, you only get one wish.
So just a quick sampling there of some of what's out there. Again, I think some of it helps us to laugh at ourselves and to take a good look at ourselves and realize how some other people have seen us. Some of the others can be a little harder to take, and it depends where you are theologically. Some may be able to move through that more readily than others. The last one I want to show, just to end on a little upbeat note, I guess, or brethren note at least we'll say, is from the movie Hacksaw Ridge that came out here in the mid-2000s thus far. 6 or 7 years ago, I think. I don't have the year in front of me. But again, about a conscientious objector pulled into war. And this is a little clip that shows kind of his experience when he goes in for training. So, Enton, if we can do that one yet, and then we'll conclude.
If you can't do it here, I can't trust you to do it in battle. I'm putting you in for a Section 8 psychiatric discharge. Dismissed.
Gentlemen, I want you to meet Private Desmond Doss. Apparently, Private Doss does not believe in violence. He does not practice violence. He will not even deign to touch a weapon. You see, Private Doss is a conscientious objector. So I plead with you, do not look to him to save you on the battlefield, because he will undoubtedly be too busy wrestling with his conscience to assist.
Sarge, that's not true, Sarge.
As you were. Now, I realize some of you might have strong feelings about this. It is what we men fight for, to defend our rights and to protect our women and children. Even if Private Doss's beliefs might cause women and children to die. So I will expect everyone in this company to give Private Doss the full measure of respect he is due for the short time he will be with us. Am I clear? Yes, Sergeant!
So a very violent movie that depicts war and all of its reality. So if that's a difficult thing for you to watch, don't recommend it, but it has some powerful messages there about the beliefs for conscientious objection. Again, I mentioned earlier A Hidden Life, one that does similar things from a European perspective. But Andrew Garfield, the one that plays Desmond Doss, the conscientious objector in this, went on to play Spider-Man later after that. So the underlying text I get from that is that brethren are superheroes. With that, we are just about reaching the end of our time here. I'm so grateful you all could come on and participate tonight. I thank you for sharing all the suggestions and thoughts and perspectives you have on different ones there in the chat platform. I've been trying to look through some of those, thanks to those who have put up some of the streaming platforms for The Chosen, one that you can check out, maybe use in some of your churches. Yeah, Screw Tape Letters, another excellent one. I like a lot of C.S. Lewis's. His book, Mere Christianity, is excellent reading as well. I don't think there was ever a film from that. It probably doesn't really lend itself as much. But the thought...
Oh, you know what I found, though? There's these doodles videos of Mere Christianity on YouTube.
Oh, really?
And it'll take just a portion or a chapter, and it doodles it out. It's really cool.
Oh,
yeah.
Fascinating. Awesome. Thanks, Susan. Well, let me leave you then with this thought. Some years ago, I saw a Canadian director named Norman Jewison on the Oscars show. He was getting a Lifetime Achievement Award. And honestly, he was old enough at that time, I thought he couldn't possibly still be alive now, but I looked it up this week and he's 95, still living in Canada and still telling stories. And that was the message that he gave to the Academy that night as he received the award. He said, "Tell good stories. The biggest grossing films are not necessarily the best. So just tell stories that move us to laughter and tears, and perhaps reveal a little truth about ourselves." I hope in our journey tonight, you've caught some of that flame as I have for digging in this vast field of media for those glimpses and glimmers and nuggets of truth that help us to get new perspectives on the divine and God's work among us. If you all have any more questions, I want to honor our time frame here, but I will stay on a little bit afterwards after Enton gives the final closing instructions here. So if you have any others, feel free to stay on for a few minutes, but otherwise, blessings to you and thanks for spending this time. Enton, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Walt. Glad to have you share with us. Glad that you're willing to stay behind for a few minutes to talk to those that may still have questions. And if people wanted to reach you afterwards, if they had follow-ups, are you willing for people to be in touch?
Yeah, actually, I had a screen there. I forgot I pulled that out. I just popped my email into the chat there. If you have follow-up questions, that's probably the easiest way to reach me.
Great. And so Walt, we are so grateful for you to lead our time together. Friends, this concludes our class and concludes our semester. So we invite you to think about coming back in the fall when we have another new lineup of courses. We don't have all of those quite lined up yet, but we'll be sure to announce them, so look for that. I'll also be sending out a course evaluation in a few days to invite you to share any feedback so that we can learn and do a even better job next time if there are things we can improve. So thank you. This concludes our course for this evening. Feel free to go if you have things calling you, but feel free to stay for a few minutes if you want to continue to chat with Walt. Walt, again, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Take care, all.